Mumu, a short story by Ivan Turgenev. From Torrents of Spring, translated by Constance Garnett. In one of the outlying streets of Moscow, in a grey house with white columns and a balcony warped all askew, there was once living a lady, a widow, surrounded by a numerous household of serfs. Her sons were in the government service at Petersburg. Her daughters were married. She went out very little, and in solitude lived through the last years of her miserly and dreary old age. Her day, a joyless and gloomy day, had long been over, but the evening of her life was blacker than night. Of all her servants, the most remarkable personage was the porter, Gerasim, a man full 12 inches over the normal height, of heroic build, and deaf and dumb from his birth. The lady, his owner, had brought him up from the village where he lived alone in a little hut, apart from his brothers, and was reckoned about the most punctual of her peasants in the payment of the seigneurial dues. Endowed with extraordinary strength, he did the work of 4 men. Work flew apace under his hands, and it was a pleasant sight to see him when he was ploughing, while, with his huge palms pressing hard upon the plough, he seemed alone, unaided by his poor horse, to cleave the yielding bosom of the earth, or when, about St. Peter's Day, he plied his scythe with a furious energy that might have mown a young birch copse up by the roots, or swiftly and untiringly wielded a flail over 2 yards long, while the hard oblong muscles of his shoulders rose and fell like a lever. His perpetual silence lent a solemn dignity to his unwearying labor. He was a splendid peasant, and except for his affliction, any girl would have been glad to marry him. But now they had taken Gerasim to Moscow, bought him boots, had him made a full-skirted coat for summer, a sheepskin for winter, put into his hand a broom and a spade, and appointed him porter. At first he intensely disliked his new mode of life. From his childhood he had been used to field labor, to village life. Shut off by his affliction from the society of men, he had grown up, dumb and mighty, as a tree grows on a fruitful soil. When he was transported to the town, he could not understand what was being done with him. He was miserable and stupefied, with the stupefaction of some strong young bull, taken straight from the meadow, where the rich grass stood up to his belly, taken and put in the truck of a railway train. And there, while smoke and sparks and gusts of steam puff out upon the sturdy beast, he is whirled onwards, whirled along with loud roar and whistle, whither, God knows. What Gerasim had to do in his new duties seemed a mere trifle to him after his hard toil as a peasant. In half an hour all his work was done, and he would once more stand stock-still in the middle of the courtyard, staring open-mouthed at all the passers-by, as though trying to wrest from them the explanation of his perplexing position. Or he would suddenly go off into some corner and, flinging a long way off the broom or the spade, throw himself on his face on the ground and lie for hours together without stirring, like a caged beast. But man gets used to anything, and Gerasim got used at last to living in town. He had little work to do. His whole duty consisted in keeping the courtyard clean, bringing in a barrel of water twice a day, splitting and dragging in wood for the kitchen and the house, keeping out strangers, and watching at night. And it must be said he did his duty zealously. In his courtyard there was never a shaving lying about, never a speck of dust. If sometimes in the muddy season the wretched nag, put under his charge for fetching water, got stuck in the road, he would simply give it a shove with his shoulder and set not only the cart but the horse itself moving. If he set to chopping wood, the axe fairly rang like glass, and chips and chunks flew in all directions. And as for strangers, after he had one night caught 2 thieves and knocked their heads together, knocked them so that there was not the slightest need to take them to the police station afterwards, everyone in the neighborhood began to feel a great respect for him. Even those who came in the daytime, by no means robbers, but simply unknown persons, at the sight of the terrible porter, waved and shouted to him as though he could hear their shouts. With all the rest of the servants, Gerasim was on terms hardly friendly. They were afraid of him, but familiar. He regarded them as his fellows. They explained themselves to him by signs, and he understood them, and exactly carried out all orders, but knew his own rights too, and soon no one dared to take his seat at the table. Gerasim was altogether of a strict and serious temper. He liked order in everything. Even the cocks did not dare to fight in his presence, or woe betide them. Directly he caught sight of them, he would seize them by the legs, swing them 10 times round in the air like a wheel, and throw them in different directions. There were geese, too, kept in the yard, but the goose, as is well known, is a dignified and reasonable bird. Gerasim felt a respect for them, looked after them, and fed them. He was himself not unlike a gander of the steppes. He was assigned a little garret over the kitchen. He arranged it himself to his own liking, made a bedstead in it of oak boards on 4 stumps of wood for legs, a truly titanic bedstead. One might have put a ton or two on it. It would not have bent under the load. Under the bed was a solid chest. In a corner stood a little table of the same strong kind, and near the table a 3-legged stool, so solid and squat that Gerasim himself would sometimes pick it up and drop it again with a smile of delight. The garret was locked up by means of a padlock that looked like a kalatch or basket-shaped loaf, only black. The key of this padlock Gerasim always carried about him in his girdle. He did not like people to come to his garret. So passed a year, at the end of which a little incident befell Gerasim. The old lady, in whose service he lived as porter, adhered in everything to the ancient ways, and kept a large number of servants. In her house were not only laundresses, sempstresses, carpenters, tailors, and tailoresses, there was even a harness maker. He was reckoned as a veterinary surgeon too, and a doctor for the servants. There was a household doctor for the mistress. There was, lastly, a shoemaker, by name Captain Klimov, a sad drunkard. Klimov regarded himself as an injured creature, whose merits were unappreciated, a cultivated man from Petersburg who ought not to be living in Moscow without occupation, in the wilds, so to speak. And if he drank, as he himself expressed it emphatically, with a blow on his chest, it was sorrow drove him to it. So one day his mistress had a conversation about him with her head steward, Gavrila, a man whom, judging solely from his little yellow eyes and nose like a duck's beak, fate itself, it seemed, had marked out as a person in authority. The lady expressed her regret at the corruption of the morals of Capiton, who had, only the evening before, been picked up somewhere in the street. "Now, Gavrila," she observed, all of a sudden, "now, if we were to marry him, what do you think? Perhaps he would be steadier." "Why not marry him indeed, He could be married, answered Gavrila. "And it would be a very good thing to be sure, Yes, only who is to marry him?" "I, But that's at your pleasure, He may, anyway, so to say, be wanted for something. He can't be turned adrift altogether." "I fancy he likes Tatiana." Gavrila was on the point of making some reply, but he shut his lips tightly. "Yes, let him marry Tatiana," the lady decided, taking a pinch of snuff complacently. "Do you hear?" "Yes, Gavrila articulated, and he withdrew.